My friends and fellow VEDSies. As someone who's been playing D&D for over 5 years now, a question I get a lot from the D&D curious people in my life is, how do I come up with all these characters? And while I won't pretend I'm the Dostoevsky of D&D, I think I do a good job creating memorable and unique characters, so I thought I would share my process with you. Also, I hope this goes without saying, but spoilers for ongoing campaigns, so if you are a player in Blue's Clues, Merry Maidens, or the currently untitled Empire game, please skedaddle. I've broken this process down into 10 steps, so let's start with step number 1. Step number 1, establish the parameters. There are two main categories of parameters you'll be working with: explicit and implicit. Let's start with the explicit ones since they're easier to understand. These are specific rules or guidelines set up by your DM, the module you're playing, or in your session 0. And they're specific choices you can or can't make for your character. Common explicit parameters might be no evil alignments, limiting races, classes, subclasses, or spells to fit within the lore, or banning or limiting content that could be triggering or upsetting for other people at the table. Tabletop role-playing is very much a trust exercise, and part of how we build that trust is by sticking to the agreed-upon rules. Of course, sometimes certain rules are up for discussion, but ignoring them altogether is just going to create problems. Our other type of parameters are the implicit ones, and these are trickier because, well, no one ever said them out loud. I'd argue the main two implicit parameters in D&D are tone and logistics. Tone is about how well your character fits into the world of this campaign. While you absolutely can make a character who contrasts with the setting, if you don't do it intentionally, it can get weird. Like, if we're playing some sort of Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley-inspired, small-town, community-driven, fighting a monster together game, and somebody brings a vagabond loner, that character's going to have a hard time. Similarly, if we're going to Barovia to fight the undead, and one character's goal is to make the best breakfast taco ever, the other players might feel like you're not taking the game seriously. Anyways, while tone is asking about vibes, logistics are focused on the more practical elements of the story. For an easy example, let's say you're doing a one-shot where you're breaking into the palace to steal the king's crown. That mission becomes a lot less dangerous and a lot less exciting if one of the players just is the queen. I mean, why does she even need the rest of the party? Making characters who are too rich, too powerful, too well connected is a common mistake in D&D because these are really fun characters in the fantasy stories we love, but practically they can just wave too many things away if you're not careful. A related issue is making sure that your backstory matches your level. At level 1, a character clearly has the potential to become somebody, but they're only slightly more powerful than your average Joe. Your backstory needs to reflect the level you're starting at and trust that they will get more powerful over time. Really, this is all just a question of verisimilitude. What do I need to do to make sure my character feels like they fit in as one of the main characters in this story? Step 2. Consider race, class, lore, imagery, and archetypes. I'm lumping all of these together because sometimes I know what I want on a mechanics level first, and sometimes I know what I want on a character level first, and there's no telling which it's going to be. However, I can give an example of when each of these was a driving factor in character creation. When I was making my Sea Elf fighter, Ophelia, there was a joke that because the party I was guesting in had so many blue people and so many people whose names started with the letter G, I should make her to match. I decided to go with the blue and make her a Sea Elf, and I decided to make her from somewhere that the party hadn't visited so that I could be in the loop on all of the lore. Specifically, I had her be from an underwater society. And the rest of her character just came from me coming up with ideas for this underwater society. Since a class is effectively a character's job, it is a really good jumping off point. Way back in 2021, I was getting ready for my first and so far only in-person game, and having seen how cool they could be, I wanted to play a Blade Singer wizard. The character of Miara, a rich girl who was sent away to work at a library to get the ADHD trained out of her, but instead was handed a sword by a wacky librarian, came pretty much just from her subclass. And everything about her mentor and the library burning down just came from there. Lore is one of the best opportunities you have to make your character feel like they belong in the world of the game. After all, you tied them into the world very explicitly. Of course they belong. My rogue, Hestia de la Guerra, came entirely from learning about the lore of her setting. The De La Guerra family are incredibly influential in another part of the setting, so she is from a less influential branch. In addition, her inciting incident came directly from the DM telling us about why Empire bad. Basically, sorcerers are considered property of the state, and there is an inquisition to round them up. My BBC Merlin loving ass could not resist that detail, so while Hestia is a rogue, the Inquisition is an important part of her backstory. Imagery is a sort of cerebral way to come up with a D&D character, but it can happen. Sometimes you know that you want your character to have fire powers, or dress like an old-timey pirate, or have a mask, and these can be great starting points. Amalthea very much started off as imagery. I had a list of subclasses that I was considering, and Lunar Soul Sorcerer was on my list. And the imagery of moon really spoke to me, specifically the contrast between the soft, controlled, stereotypically feminine moon and the feral werewolf knight aspects of lunar imagery. Thus, Amalthea is this seemingly composed drow priestess who is constantly struggling to keep the wolf under check. And for our other, more cerebral option, the archetype. Of course, not every story has easily defined archetypes, but there usually are some to play with, whether you want to go very straightforward or be more subversive. There's also different archetypes to consider depending on what type of game you're playing. Like, you don't just have to stick to traditional fantasy. Yeah, Mags, you don't. For example, many moons ago, I was trying to come up with a character who would fit in a Percy Jackson meets Fantasy High type campaign, aka a urban fantasy setting where teens go to a summer camp to learn how to become adventurers. So I started thinking about the types of kids you meet at summer camp. I went to Girl Scout and Arthritis Camp, so for me, the homeschooled kid and the kid who's really into getting their patches and badges were archetypes that spoke to me. Fusing them together was the foundation for my little gnome druid, Brina. Step 3, inspirations. Now at this point, you hopefully have some sort of base concept. Congratulations! Now it's time to put some flesh on those bones. And luckily, we can steal some of that flesh. Inspiration can come from just about anywhere, but for me, it tends to come from music or other fictional characters. And because I'm a theater kid, sometimes those are one and the same. Let's circle back to my girl Hestia. When I was talking about the Inquisition, I said, my BBC Merlin loving ass could not resist that detail, and I meant that very literally. Morgana was a game changer for me as a tween, and so Hestia and her maidservant are very much inspired by Morgana and Gwen. As a teenager, her maidservant Miranda got taken by the Inquisition because she was caught saving Hestia's life. And while she was getting tortured, Hestia was in solitary confinement for days. While this isn't a one-to-one with any particular Merlin episode, it does feel like it could have been a plotline. The difference, though, is that Hestia's family actually cares a lot about her, and so they rescue her. But it completely shatters her worldview. But unlike Morgana, she doesn't go down the path of vengeance. She's stuck in her grief, unable to process this tragedy that everyone around her is politely ignoring. Because, if you couldn't guess, her other inspiration is Hamlet. Now, if you know what to look for, those are pretty obvious, so let's give a more subtle example. When I was building Amalthea, I was struggling to figure out exactly what type of charisma she should have and exactly what flavor of angst she should have. She's afraid of her powers because she's been told that she has to hide them or else risk hurting people. So Elsa from Frozen felt like a natural pull. From her, Amalthea got her distance, several songs for her playlist, and her specific fear. If I let my powers show, people will get hurt. On the flip side, I needed to figure out her charisma. I already knew I wanted her to be a priestess, so I started thinking about characters who were priests and mentors. They're great listeners and they make you feel like you know them without ever actually sharing that much about themselves. Two characters came to mind for that, Guion from Star Trek Next Gen and Caduceus Clay from Critical Role Campaign 2. From Guion, I took the gentle, non-judgmental nudging in the right direction, and from Caduceus, the fact that he is intentionally avoiding the spotlight. Now, that's already a fun mix, but I wanted just a bit more. Amalthea and Elsa's powers are very different, so I figured that how she controls the wolf would be different than how Elsa controls the ice. I figured the wolf would be tied to desire and negative emotions, and by suppressing them, Amalthea could try to suppress the wolf. So when I thought about characters using control and toxic positivity to hide the unlovable and uncontrollable parts of themselves, I thought of Sally from When Harry Met Sally. Obviously. Does this sound like a hot mess? Yes. Is it a hot mess? Kind of. But I built the narrative around these traits and inspirations, so no one else is going to see this Frankenstein mess. That's the great thing about the process. It's just for you. Step 4. Consider how and why. Great. So at this point we have vibes and a general sense of what we want the character to be. Now it's time to start connecting these dots. Let's go back to my very first character, Evangeline. I knew for her that I wanted someone who'd left their life as a baker, who wanted to become a wizard, and was a fighter using a rolling pin as a weapon. To give 20-year-old me credit, that's a very funny concept. But it begs a lot of questions, namely, how, why, and why not? So, for example, why is she a fighter if she wants to be a wizard? Well, wizard stuff costs money. Rolling pin free. How does she get into an adventuring guild using a rolling pin? Well, she uses a letter of recommendation, actually. Why not buy a sword in the meantime? Again, sword costs money. Why does she not have money? Because she had to sell the business to get to the guild. Why didn't she do this sooner? She had to take care of her brother. So on and so forth. Step 5. Build a narrative. This is the step where we take our vibes, our inspirations, our questions, and our answers, and we turn it into an actual story. Now, your D&D backstory should not be super long or complicated. You actually want to give your DM room to play. That being said, there are a few things you should include. The wheres. Has this character lived in the same town their whole life? Traveled the world? Something in between? If the answer is something in between, you should figure out which of those places are most significant to them. Number 2, the who's. Who have been the most important people in their life? Again, we are not looking for a Rolodex of every person they've ever met, but 1 or 2 people for each phase of life should do it. The what's. Even if they've lived in the same town, they have presumably had more than one role in society over the course of their life. The timeline. Roughly how long did things take, and roughly how old were they when they happened? Once you know all of these things, you just need to put them in a couple coherent paragraphs. Like, seriously, I'm a fan of flowery purple prose, but that is not the object of this game. The goal is to convey who this character is and what their life has been up to this point in a way that the DM can easily understand while still having room to play. Step 6. Mechanics. Some people will argue that this should come way earlier in the process, and I understand their point. But this is a video about how I create characters, not the platonic ideal of character creation. And for me, since I thought about my character's race, class, and subclass way back in phase 2, I know that what I want to do is possible. This isn't about that. This is about fine-tuning the details. This is also where I'd argue that asking your DM about bending or breaking a rule isn't a bad idea. Not a big rule, mind you. I'm talking about swapping proficiencies, learning an extra language, getting a weapon, that sort of thing. But yeah, regardless of how much customization you need, you still gotta turn in a character sheet. Step 7, aesthetics. This is another step that some people will do much earlier in the process, and admittedly, sometimes I do earlier in the process. Like for Ophelia, as soon as I set up an underwater inheritance crisis, I knew she was going to be wearing Regency-coded clothing. Meanwhile, Evangeline, I still don't know what her aesthetic is, and I've been playing her for over 5 years. Everyone will design their character and their character's clothes differently, and depending on the character, the process can change. Admittedly, this isn't something that comes easy to me, but if you put in some time and effort, it can be really cool. For example, let's go back to Brina. Because she was this innocent homeschooled gnome, I wanted to play up how young she seemed for her age. Like, she was 14 and getting mistaken for 9. Part of that was because of how she looked. She wore pigtails and her main outfit was cotton candy colored and had a glitter hummingbird on the shirt. But Brina grew up a lot through that campaign, and I was able to visually signify it through her hair and her clothes. First, she got rid of the pigtails to use a magic item. Later, the warlock bought her a magic mantle, which she made look like a green leather jacket. Not long after that, she got clothes that looked appropriate for a high schooler. And later, after she'd given up on her parents, she got her ears pierced and learned how to actually style her hair, which took her from looking like this to looking like this. God, visual storytelling's cool. Step 8, voice. One of the main differences between TTRPGs and other reasons you create OCs is you're actually going to play this character. And that means you're going to need to speak as them. Now, when I say voice, I don't just mean accents and affectations, though those can be fun. But the fact is, you don't need to be a professional actor to give your character a unique flair. Simple things like pitch, rhythm, and vocab can make a big difference in making a character feel unique. Step 9, prep for sessions. This step is optional, but it's also a lot of fun. When I say prep for a session, I don't just mean get your character sheet and your backstory ready and send a copy to your DM. That shit's mandatory. No, I'm talking about all the stuff you do after that's done while you're waiting for session 1. What does this entail? A lot of things, potentially. I mean, about playlists, mood boards, buying character-specific dice, writing scenes from their backstory as a narrative, taking personality tests in character. Honestly, the sky's the limit. Now, like I said, this step is absolutely optional. However, I find that the more of this prep I do before session 1, the easier it is for me to get in character and stay in character in a session. Step 10, have fun. Unlike the last step, this one's not optional. Have fun and know that even if things don't go the way you planned, the character and the campaign can still end up better than you ever imagined. The prep and the planning is all well and good, but it's to make sure that when you sit down at the table with your friends, you feel prepared and excited to start. This is just how I reach that place. That being said, if you are new to tabletop RPGs or are trying to get a new angle on character creation, I hope that this helps you build cool, dynamic characters. And if your process is totally different from mine, I'm curious to hear what it is and how it works for you. And with that, my friends and fellow VEDSies, I'll see you tomorrow.